Assalamu alaikum. To begin this, I need to talk for about 5 or 10 minutes about, what I believe contributed to my becoming an atheist, because I grew up in a Christian family, what I experienced in the Qur'an and how that sort of changed my perception. Let me start out by mentioning that my mother certainly played no role in my becoming an atheist. My mother she had tremendous dignity and class. The neighbors loved her. She was a registered nurse, and she put in many extra hours at the hospital. When she died, her funeral was packed, and person after person that came up to me had a story to tell about my mother and her goodness. She was a deeply religious woman, a great mother, a great teacher. My father, on the other hand, was a difficult man. For some strange reason, had this tremendous rage inside him. He had this terrible violence inside him. And his drinking, though, only made him all the more volatile. And this would happen night after night after night. And so my 4 brothers and I was the 4th in line. My 4 brothers and I lived a frightening and precarious childhood. But I'd have to say the worst of it was watching my father regularly taunt and threaten and abuse my mother. And it would happen day in, day in, day in, day out, night in, night out. You see, it's really not so bad when you're the target of your father's violence. You might think it's bad when a child is the target of their father's violence. At the moment of attack, you're really not thinking about anything except your own survival. And when he's threatening you, "I'm going to hurt you, bad boy," you're not thinking about anything at that moment except escape. But a far worse fear is the terror that overcomes you when you watch your father go after your mother. Because she's the only source of warmth and kindness, of love and protection that you know. From a little boy's standpoint, then you've lost everything. But far worse than the fear is the guilt. And it comes over you from several directions. First of all, there's the guilt that comes at you upon you from the growing antipathy you have towards your father. Because we're taught to love and respect our parents, and we are born with this natural bonding attachment to them. But when you watch something like this happen night after night after night, and this rage is growing inside you, you're being pulled in opposite directions. But the worst guilt of all, and it is by far the very worst, is knowing that you did nothing to stop your father from hurting your mother. You come to realize with ever greater and greater clarity, you come to realize your own weakness, your own impotence, your own incompetence, your own worthlessness, your own cowardice. And the hate grows and festers inside you. Not only for the man that you call father, but for yourself as well. It is a terrible, terrible thing to make a young boy choose between his mother and himself. When I was little, I used to daydream about life without my father. I just wanted the violence to go away. I wanted not to be afraid anymore. I felt like I was trapped in a bad dream and there was no way out. And so I prayed to God again and again and again to remove my father from our lives. But he was always there, and very soon I began to wonder if God really was. I could not fathom why God would subject my mom to such lifelong punishment. I could not imagine what great sin she must have committed, or that we, her children, must have committed to deserve my father. I was too young to see the wisdom in allowing my mom, to suffer the violence and abuse of my father. I was too young to understand why God would let innocent children tremble night after night after night in their beds. I was too young to see how the mercy of God could even extend to my father with all his terrible failings. All I could see in my world was chaos and violence and fear, and so it became easy for me to question the existence of God, and I began to do that at a very early age. Why didn't he just make us angels and pop us into heaven if he could make us angels, which I was always taught he could? Is this the best world he could create, I thought? Is this the most perfect world he could create for our existence, for our beginning? I just couldn't figure it. And all the explanations I received from priests and doctors and lawyers, from whoever, spoke to me or taught me, they just didn't make sense to me. In any case, so I became an atheist when I was 16, even though I was going to Catholic school at the time. Declared myself an atheist in one class. It was a confrontation between me and a priest. We were talking about God and the purpose of life. And I expressed my views, and he said, well, then you don't believe in God. I said, well, I guess I don't. In any case, when I was 28, to make a long story short, some friends of mine gave me a copy of the Qur'an. And one night I was sitting in Diamond Heights, and I ran out of stuff to read, and I took this gift that my friends gave me, and I began to read it. And I came to the first verse. Well, I opened the Qur'an, read the first page. In the second surah, about 37 verses into the Qur'an, I came upon the story of mankind. And I have to admit, I read through it very quickly. It was about 9-10 verses long, story of the first man and woman. And I recognized some of the details. It was similar to what I had learned when I was a child, but I noticed that there was something wrong. It was apparent to me that whoever authored this Qur'an, of course I wasn't a Muslim at the time, so I didn't have any idea who that was, whoever authored this Qur'an clearly did not understand the real meaning of the story. I just read through it once, and then I read through it again, just to try to see what kind of point the author was making, and then I read through it a third time and a fourth, and then I realized this is something strange going on here. I'm going to read this much more carefully. I'm going to need to go through this story line by line, verse by verse, because it's obvious that the author is trying to bring out another point, obviously gotten the details confused. They didn't even understand the whole purpose of the story. And I wasn't quite sure what it was, but definitely he packs a lot of meaning into almost every word. And I thought the writer, at least, seems to have a great measure of brilliance. So I came to the 30th verse of the second surah, Surah Al-Baqarah, and it began like this. It said, "Behold, your Lord said to the angels, I am going to place a vicegerent on earth." The Arabic word is khalifa. It means a representative or an emissary of mine. And they said, the angels said, "Will you place therein one who will spread corruption and shed blood, while we celebrate your praises and glorify your holiness?" And God said, he said, "Truly I know what you do not know." See, that's the verse that hooked me. That's the verse that caught my attention. That's the one that kept on making me read the story again and again and again. I'm going to place a representative of mine on earth, a vicegerent of mine, an emissary, one who acts on my behalf. I thought, that's not the way it goes. You're not supposed to be placing man on the earth in some positive role, some elective office. You place man on earth as a punishment for his sin. But still, it was an amazing line. But then I come to the next line, and it says, "And the angels say, will you place therein one who will spread corruption and shed blood, while we celebrate your praises and glorify you?" I looked at it again. I couldn't believe the question. They said, "Will you place therein one who will spread corruption and shed blood, while we, the angels, celebrate your praises and glorify you?" I looked at that and I said, exactly. That would be my question. Why would you create this being when he's capable of doing tremendous wrongdoing? When he could spread corruption and shed much blood? Why would you create this violent and pernicious creature when you could create angels? As the angels clearly say, "While we, the angels, celebrate your praises and glorify you." They were asking one of the most fundamental questions in the entire history of religion. Why create you, man, this utterly fallible creature, this creature who could rebel against God's will, who could do such tremendous wrongdoing, who could wreak havoc like no other creature on earth, when you can make them angels? And look where the question is being asked. It's being asked in heaven. It's almost like saying, look, why don't you just make them angels and be up here in heaven with us, I looked at that question and said, that's my question. Why create man, this most destructive and violent creature, when you can make them angels? That whole question, everything that I ever thought, everything that I ever experienced, everything that I ever knew was in that question. It was as if the author took my life and wanted to pick out exactly the right question to humiliate me, to provoke me, to anger me. And then look at the answer. And he said, God said, "Truly I know what you do not know." You know, in modern parlance, we would say, I know exactly what I'm doing. And that would happen several times as I read through the Qur'an. And sometimes I would just get into so agitated by what I read, I'd start arguing with this voice that I'm reading before me, that's calling to me. So we turn to the next verse. And in the next verse it says, and he taught Adam, God taught Adam, the names of all things. And then he placed them before the angels and said, tell me their names if you are right. So this verse is clearly referring to the previous one. And he taught Adam the names of all things. So here we see Adam is not only just a creature who knows how to name things, who's acquiring the gift of language, but he's also a learning creature. God is teaching him. That the very first thing that the Qur'an is going to emphasize here is man's intellect. He is a learning creature. He is taught. And what is he taught? What is one of the great intellectual gifts he's given in response to the angel's question? The gift of language. And he taught Adam the names of all things. And then he placed them before the angels and said, tell me their names if you are right. Okay, you have this you have this natural question about this creation of mankind. Here, this mankind is this human being, this human creature is a learning creature. He has many intellectual gifts. Here, I'm going to place these things before you. Tell me their names if you are right about man. And what did the angel say? Glory to you. We have no knowledge except what you have taught us. In truth, it is you who are knowing, the wise. We have no knowledge. This would take knowledge. This would take an intellect that they don't possess. In truth, it is you who are knowing, the wise. You got it. It's easy for you. You have the knowing, the wise. You have knowledge. You have wisdom. And so in the next verse we read, and he said, "O Adam, tell them their names." And when he had told them their names, notice how it's just like it's nothing for him. For mankind, he has this phenomenal ability. And when he had told them their names, as if it's just a triviality for man, he names them. And when he had told them their names, God said, "Did I not tell you that I know what is unseen in the heavens and the earth? And I know what you reveal and conceal?" And he's clearly going back to the angel's question. Yes, you have these natural concerns about the creation of mankind. Yes, this is something you have overlooked that you haven't considered. And that's clearly the point of these verses. Even though I felt that the author didn't quite, he was taking one of the great stories in the history of humankind, one of the fundamental greatest stories in the history of mankind, and molding it and using it as a vehicle for an entirely original message. And God said, "Did I not tell you that I know what is unseen in the heavens and the earth? And I know what you reveal and what you conceal?" In other words, didn't I tell you I know exactly what I'm doing? I thought about it for a minute. Oh, it's obvious. What did their question reveal? You just go back and look at the question. It revealed the sinful and sinister propensities of man. Why are you all looking at me like that? You're starting to scare me. You're all looking very serious. Am I losing you? So, they revealed the sinister and evil propensities of man. But what did their question conceal? And all you have to do is think about it for a minute. Human beings, yes, they could do evil. Yes, they could do wrong. Yes, they could create misery. But they could also do exactly the opposite. They could choose to do evil. They could choose to do tremendous good. They could choose to do tremendous violence. They could choose to show tremendous compassion. They could choose to live by falsehood. They could choose to live by the greatest truths. They could be terribly ugly. They could be terribly beautiful. And up until that point in my life, I, like the angels, that only saw one side of the coin. For the first time when I read that verse, believe it or not, it was an eye-opener for me. I had always been obsessed with the evil potentials of human beings. When I read that verse, I realized that, and I had a great example right in front of me with my own mom. "And behold, we said to the angels, 'Bow down to Adam,' and they bowed down. But not so Iblis." Iblis is like the father of Satan. "He refused and was arrogant. He was of those who reject faith." An interesting statement. "And so we said to the angels, 'Bow down to Adam,' and they bowed down." But not so Iblis. Iblis is Satan, this rebellious force, this evil prompter, the one who whispers into the human heart. He comes into being. And with the introduction of Satan, we have the introduction of evil, that evil influences on human beings. And notice why Iblis does not bow down. He refuses because he was arrogant. Here the Qur'an says that, seems to be saying that the root of all evil is not always material wants. It's not always money. It's not always greed. At the heart of evil is arrogance, putting yourself above all others, of assigning to yourself special priority and neglecting the rights of others, of pride and arrogance and envy. I looked at that verse and I said, okay, I get why you would create angels to sort of influence man in a positive direction. But why in this story now are you introducing Satan? What sort of role was Satan play? And then, of course, you just think about it for a minute and you say, yes. The story is telling us that on one hand, we have these magnanimous urgings come from one direction. On the other hand, we have these satanic urgings coming from another direction. In other words, the Quran is telling us that man is not only a learning creature, but he's a moral creature. He has understanding of right and wrong. Man is not only an intelligent being, but a moral being. So mankind is not only an intellectual being, but a moral being. In the next verse, O Adam, dwell you and your spouse in the garden, and eat freely thereof what you wish, and eat freely thereof what you wish. But come not near this tree, for then you will be among the wrongdoers. I looked at this verse and I was, starting to wonder if the author was drifting back to the old story again. I thought it was drifting back to the old story. Man sins, man's punished for his sins with earthly life. Maybe the author is drifting, he had a good idea and now he's drifting back to the sort of traditional story. Maybe he couldn't make his mind up what story he wanted. There's no sense of God being threatened by the possibility of man eating from the tree. Nothing special about the tree. It's just a tree. God's not nervous at the prospect at all. But here, just, calmly says, but if you do, you will be among the wrongdoers. God is not worried about himself. It's just warning man, making it clear that if you do this, you've committed a wrongful deed. Again, the whole tenor of all these verses that you read through it is God knows exactly what he's doing. Okay, next verse. But Satan caused them to slip and expelled them from the state in which they were. And we said, go you all down, some of you being the enemies of others, and on earth will be your dwelling place and provision for a time. What? I said. I was expecting now the rage, the anger, the violence, the jealousy. That's what I was expecting. Okay, they eat from the tree. Where's the rage, the violence? I'm going to punish you now. You're going to sweat on earth. And you're going to suffer, and you're going to stub your toe, and you're going to work, and you're going to labor. And you're going to die there for what you did. And where is the woman? All right? The greatest humiliation? The man will rule over her. When he's obviously her intellectual inferior because she and the angels she and Satan seduced him, and he just bumbled along and committed a real, wrong deed. But the story is obviously different, though. No threat here. As a matter of fact, look at the way it says, O Adam, dwell you and your spouse in the garden, and eat freely thereof what you wish. But come not near this tree, for you will be among the wrongdoers. Then they make the mistake. But Satan caused them to slip and expelled them from the state in which they were. And we said, go all you down, some of you being enemies of others, will be adversaries of others. Some of you will be adversaries of each other. And on earth will be your dwelling place and provision for a time. If you look at it, on earth will be your dwelling place and provision for a time. That's not the words of a God that is lost, that is really extremely upset. On earth will be your dwelling place and provision for a time. When you read these verses for the first time, I don't know, maybe I'm nuts. And many people think I am. But when you read these verses for the first time, this is just so much that catches your attention. But Satan caused them to slip. I remember, I couldn't get that verse those words out of my head. Satan caused them to slip? To slip? The greatest sin in the history of the human race, and it's called a slip? A slip, I said? Momentary loss of focus? The greatest sin in the history of humanity? Why we're all here? Why we're all suffering? Why we experience death? A slip? I didn't believe it. I went to my Arabian friends at that time. I didn't know any Arabic. I came to this verse. We went through it line by line. I said, now don't change any words. Just read them one at a time. But Satan made them, and I said, okay, this one right here. What does it mean? Slip. Slip. I mean, after all, they didn't commit murder. They didn't commit robbery, rape, pillaging, assault. They ate a couple of pieces of fruit. No, it's not the greatest sin in the history of humanity by any means. We see that God originally intended to put man on earth as his vicegerent. We see a period of preparation where he's being prepared intellectually, where he's growing as a moral creature. When does God finally put him on earth? What signals that he's ready to begin? He makes his first independent choice. It's not the worst deed in the history of humanity. It's minor on anybody's scale, but it shows that mankind is ready to act on his own, to be his own, to make his own choices, that God has empowered him to make choices, and he's ready to make them and carry them out and see them most often to their expected ends, if God wills. And then Adam received words from his Lord, and God turned to him mercifully, for he's oft returning, ever merciful. Well, if I had any doubts up till now that God is not enraged by what this has happened, that God hasn't prepared mankind for this choice, for what was eventually going to happen, that all this was preparation for mankind to begin his earthly sojourn in this famous allegory. If I had any doubts before now, I had them, certainly didn't have them after reading this verse. This verse is entirely consoling, reaching and merciful, reaching out to mankind in mercy. And whoever follows my guidance has nothing to fear, nor shall they grieve. It is an emotional picture. This young couple is here, in fear and in shame, feeling remorse, and God reaches out to them and turns towards them and tells them, you have nothing to fear, nor shall you grieve. I know this is tough for you, but you've been prepared for it up till now, through your entire existence. It had to happen. This is a necessary stage in your development, in your growth. But just hang in there, follow my guidance, be true to me and I'll be true to you. I'll guide you, I'll help you, I'll do whatever you need. Just follow my guidance and you have nothing to fear, nor shall you grieve.